All right, guys, welcome to Sustainable Urban Agriculture Coalition as we're presenting how to have a successful fall garden. My name is Amber Peterson. I'm the current president of this organization that was founded in 2013. And we're just gonna start out with some welcome announcements here. We have Instagram and Facebook.
Watching this.
Follow us on Instagram at SUAC St. Petersburg and Facebook at Sustainable Urban Agriculture Coalition. At this time, we are still actively pursuing grants, and we'll be partnering with any local businesses, for profit or for nonprofits. The more partners that we have in this, the more likely we are to get certain grants. So keep that in mind as you move forward. Maybe it's not for you, but maybe you know somebody in the industry or in and around our area that might be interested in being a partner for us as we go for these grants. Speaking of partners, though, the St. Pete Time Bank is one of our partners. And you know what? We give you time credits just for joining this presentation. So if you guys are not familiar with the St. Pete Time Bank, it is an hour-for-hour exchange. It's a whole community based out in St. Petersburg and the surrounding area. It branched off from the Tampa Bay Time Bank. And now St. Pete has its own. And with some potlucks, there was a potluck recently outdoors. I believe it was rained out over the summer. So maybe we'll be having a few more of those in a less rainy part of the season. But either way, it's a great way to get some gardening help done as well. And they're part of our partners because they help support us in some of the platforms that we use to bring you some of these presentations. So one of our other partners is the Southside Fresh Market. It goes on every Sunday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. They're currently located at 2184 9th Avenue South and only open on Sundays at the moment, but they're going to be moving shortly here in the month of October and possibly opening up to a 6-7 day week market. So just keep that in mind. It's nearby, and they're hoping to have a garden at their new location, so it'll just be more reasons to stop by. So if you've never been there, check it out. They have a lot of local vendors. It varies from month to month. You can always check on their website or even week to week. You can always check on their website and see who's there and see some of your favorites. They have online ordering now. So if I know the Hive likes to come out there and has the most wonderful breads baked for us, Sandy. And you can order online and pick up if that's what you prefer. Or and then I just wanted to also welcome one of our brand new members as an organization, Benison Farm. They're located at the St. Augustine Episcopal Church. It is really two churches coming together to try and serve South St. Pete area fresh organic food. So
challenging the election. Larry Ellis said, "Oh well, I think we should all vote."
A little bit of chatter in the background, guys. If you can mute.
Yes,
Thank you so much. Okay, so Benison Farm is one of our local business members who recently signed up, most recent one, so that's why they're getting highlighted here. So if you want to become a business member of ours, we have those varying degrees of membership as well. But check them out. They're always looking for volunteers as well, just trying to serve good organic food to the citizens of South St. Pete. All right, and just so you know, we have a few special events coming. The virtual garden tour has been moved. It was originally planned for November, but now we've kind of flip-flopped our dates. So December 11th is the new plan for our virtual garden tour. And then if you guys remember, if you were at all a part of the one back in March that was headed up by, their name escapes me at the moment, but it was headed up by another agency, and we have taken over as part of it. They're still helping us out a lot with the back end. But we're going to be doing the virtual garden tour here, planned on December 11th.
That was the Sierra Club, Amber.
Thank you, Karen. Sierra Club.
You're welcome.
All right. And our SUAC annual fundraiser, which we've called the morning market, the new moon market, if it happens on the new moon, which would be the 20th as well, is our annual fundraiser. That was originally planned for December. Now we're looking between two dates of either the 6th or the 20th. And this is just going to be a great time outdoor event. We're looking at Boyd Hill for the space. And if anybody's interested in vending, please just let us know. Also, we're always in need for volunteers, either before or day of, to help the planning process or even just make the event be as fun and entertaining as possible. So If you're interested in any of those things, just let us know, but otherwise just save the dates and hopefully we'll see you at those events. Also save the date. Our next Zoom meeting is going to be on Monday, October 4th. We're not going to be returning to in-person at this time, but just put that down out there. We'll have something planned for you on that Monday. Back to the first Monday of the month. So it's only going to be 3 weeks from now. All right. Without further ado, we're going to get started with our presentation, Fall Gardening. Where do I start? How can I have a good harvest? And how much sun is enough sun? So I want to thank you for joining us, and we're going to answer some of these questions and more. And to kick off this topic, we're going to have Bill Richkus, who is had a 38-year career protecting the environment. He studied oceanography, was introduced to organic farming by his father, and moved to Florida in 2017. And I hear Ida welcomed you. Isn't that right, Bill?
No, Irma.
Irma, one of those, right? Ida just happened.
One of those.
All right, when you're ready, take it away, Bill.
Okay, first a little background. As you can see, the garden is called the Euclid Heights Community Garden, and it's behind the St. Petersburg Vineyard Church on 50th Avenue and 10th Street. The garden, from my understanding, was started when there was an administrator at the church that was very interested in gardening, and I guess a group there. And they did quite a bit of work in developing the space behind the church as a garden, built big compost bins and put in rain barrels and so forth. But that administrator apparently left, and some of the people involved in the garden left, and I guess it fell on kind of hard times. And then two of the members, many of you may know, Maggie Jensen and Desiree Sims, made an effort to resurrect a group to participate in the garden. And I learned about it from some friends who had heard about it. I'm not sure how. So we attended a meeting, and in that meeting, there were probably 10 people, and of those 10 people, I think 5 are still involved. So we had a group of, 5 new people and several of the remaining people, and with Maggie leading the effort, really started to enhance the garden and clear it up. Just to give you an example of its status at the time, when we cleared it up to start refreshing beds and everything, there were sweet potatoes everywhere, and we dug up about 100 pounds of sweet potatoes, which must have been in there a long time. So since, and then Maggie has gotten sidelined with things, and I kind of have taken over running the group. So the garden, Amber, if you continue with the pictures, there we go. I'm not exactly sure of the amount of space we have, but we have kind of 3 sections. So the one on the top left, we have 12 cinder block beds. And I believe Maggie told me she scavenged those cinder blocks from some construction project. And there are 3 arbors that you could see going back. And then in the back of that, we have kind of a fruit orchard with some exotic trees and another big raised bed. Down at the bottom, that is a butterfly garden that's right at the front that we just refreshed. We dug out all the weeds, put down landscaping fabric and some mulch. And on the top right, there are private beds off to one side. So we rent those private beds, and the funds from renting the beds go towards supporting the garden together with donations. We don't have a membership fee or anything. We have a pretty informal arrangement with the church. In essence, we don't have any kind of written agreement with the church. So one day, hopefully, we won't find the bulldozer back there plowing down our plants. The group, we have work days. And the big work days are generally at the beginning of the planting season where we are now. We use, as a guideline, the University of Florida's Extension Service Guideline Vegetable Gardening in Florida. Now that gives, preferred varieties of things and timing for planting and so forth. And then I've been keeping a garden log for the last 3 years to see what worked and what didn't work. Although we find out what worked one year doesn't necessarily work the next year. So a big effort, we start off really in August, and we have volunteers within the group that start seedlings, so we don't have to buy all the plants. And obviously, if anybody started seedlings, you have ups and downs and slugs eating your plants and rain beating them up, but we usually do pretty good and have a pretty good variety of the large number of many of the plants we want to put in. We try to focus on things that produce a lot on a continual basis. So a lot of greens like collards and mustard and pak choy, where you can harvest the leaves pretty continuously over an extended period of time. Things like lettuce and radishes, when it gets cool. One of our favorite things, we call it broccolini, but I've forgotten the variety. It's a variety of broccoli that produces multiple small heads. And as you harvest it, it just keeps continually producing the heads. So that's one of our favorites. So we start the seeds generally in August, and then about mid-September, many of the plants are big enough to put in. And so we had a big work day yesterday, and we plant pretty intensively. Remarkable to me when we started doing this, we actually plant plants in the holes in the cinder blocks, and they do very well. So for example, pak choy, we generally plant those in the block holes, and you get big, beautiful heads of pak choy, and then plant the centers of the beds. And in order to, and then we tend to be not necessarily follow guidelines on spacing because those beds are fairly small. So we do pretty intensive plantings closer together than most recommendations. But needless to say, and then when some crops are finished, we replant with additional things. So we'll do multiple crops of bush beans, for example. And in order to do that, you really have to refresh the beds. So we do use granular organic fertilizer. This year, I forgot to order it before the restrictions, so we were shy, or I forgot there's one thing called coop poop, which is composted chicken manure. So we used, for the work yesterday, we used black cow, which is mulched cow manure, and we have compost bins, so we sieve our compost, and then we get additional garden soil. So we introduced that into all the beds, mixed it up really well, and then use that mixed up soil to refresh the soil in the cinder blocks. Once that's done, if we did have granular fertilizer, we'd probably add some of that also, but we also use that to refresh the beds when we're putting in like second crops. So then with the plants we had available yesterday, which were lettuce and pak choy and kale, curly kale, and Swiss chard, we put in all of those plants and put in some seeds. We put in some bush bean seeds, radishes, and more lettuce seeds in between the started lettuce. So the bed on the bottom right is, that's our lettuce bed, and there's a mix. I saw somebody's comment about labeling their seeds. I had this very elaborate flat of 72 spots with 6 different kinds of lettuce, all marked well, and then chopped it and wound up scooping up the soil with all the seeds and just throwing them in there. So we have a surprise group of lettuce. We have no idea what they are. So the lettuce is in there. For lettuce, we put in the started plants, then sprinkle some seeds in between, so that when the started plants are pretty much fading, the plants coming up from seed, will be a second crop for us. And just as an example around that, we have arugula, which obviously is good for salads and so forth. We tend to try to keep, but there's a row of trees, arborvitae along the edge of the garden, and that shades the beds that are on that side. So we put the lettuce there and put some of the things that are less sun tolerant over on that side. The rest of the beds are pretty much full sun most of the day. In my own bed, in the private beds, I'm experimenting. I just put up a shade cloth, the 50% shade cloth, just to see, if the lettuce does any better or so forth. So depending on that, how that works out, we may experiment with that in the big garden. Needless to say, it's a pretty big space. Our members volunteer to water. We try to water. We hand water once a day and take turns. But it's a lot of work. But you need to do it, especially in this climate, to keep those starting plants going. So that's about it. We're getting ready. Hopefully, when the additional plants get big enough, we'll have additional work days and put in the rest of the crops. That's about it.
Awesome, Bill. Thank you. So just a few takeaways that I saw and got was, plan ahead. Now, you guys didn't see it, and I'm sorry I didn't take a picture of it, but Bill had like a little diagram of what goes where. He was really organized about what he wanted to do, and talking with him, he had some plans of adjusting which bed was where, and when some plants didn't do well in one spot, switching spots to see what works better this year. So gather materials. They had a nice heap of compost up in the corner. They had their compost actual bins in the back. And then, of course, the black cow. Gather your friends. How many was there, Bill? Would you say like 12, 15 people?
Yes. Yep.
There you go. Yeah, good amount of people there. Get dirty, water often, and most certainly learn from last year. What do you think about those takeaways, Bill? Is that about sum it up pretty good?
I think so. Covers it good. Covers it well.
All right. So we have a couple questions.
There you go. Thanks.
So who's that just speaking?
That came up and disappeared. The chat question.
All right. So chat host Zoe, are there any questions in the chat?
It looks like Debbie's saying, where is this garden again?
Okay, it's behind St. Pete Vineyard Church, which is on the corner of 50th Street. I'm sorry, 10th Street and 50th Avenue North.
Excellent, excellent. And
All right, thank you.
is that all the questions that we have in the chat right now? Okay, I'm just going to ask a few extra ones here then, because I'm dying to know. Bill, what's your favorite thing to eat out of the garden?
Our favorite vegetable, which Maggie put us on to, is Chinese long beans. They're a pole bean, and they're green beans that grow about 18 inches long. And you pick them when they're a little thinner than a pencil and cut them into pieces. They are fabulous, and they produce for weeks and weeks and weeks. A good sharing vegetable for a big group.
Caleb, I think is how you say it, has a question. Do you do any perennials or fruit trees?
Yeah, our little orchard has, some people call it a strawberry tree, others call it a cotton candy tree, that produces little red berries that when you taste them, they taste exactly like cotton candy. We have plantain trees in the back. We have 2 different mulberries. We have a forest of papayas. We have a moringa tree. We have an elderberry bush. We have some cassava. So, we have a starfruit tree too. So quite an aggregation.
Very nice. And last question we have from Alexandra is, do you remember the name of the everlasting broccoli?
Boy, it escapes me, and I don't have it in front of me. I'm sorry. I could give it to Amber. I don't know if there's some place you could post it.
Sure, we'll post it on our Facebook.
Okay.
And we have one more question popping in here from Jay, who says, how much do you charge to rent a bed and how big are the beds?
The beds are the same size, and I don't know what the dimensions are, probably about 5 feet by 3.5 feet. And it's $50 a year. But of course, most people just plant. I've tried planting year round, but it's not too successful. I guess the other thing is the church provides us with water at no cost. So we're very cautious about our use of water.
Awesome, thank you. And we actually just had one more. How many people from the church help out in the garden?
We actually just have a Bible group from the church where the study is called Growing Vines, and they are planting some pole beans on one of the fences to follow as they go through the Bible study. So, but most people are not members of the church congregation.
Right. Thank you so much, Bill, for your presentation. I know you got to take off here soon, but hopefully you'll be able to stick around a little bit.
Yep.
So once again, this was Bill's SUAC debut. So everybody give him a round of applause. I know we can't hear you, but just imagine the roar of the crowd. And we'll be happy to have you back again here soon. And Bill, do you guys need any volunteers out there now? Is there open space? Do you want more gardeners? Are you full? What do you need?
We're always open to new people, I guess, until we get overcrowded. And of course, people pop in and pop out. I guess I'd have to talk to the group about it too.
All right, sounds good. So if you have any questions with Bill or anything about his garden, or maybe interest in working out his garden at some point, just shoot him an email. We'll have that up a little bit later. Richkus though at gmail.com. Was that right?
That's correct.
Right. Richkus@gmail.com. We'll have that, throw that in the chat real quick for you. So if you have any questions regarding this garden or any of his ideas and methods that they've done already, you know, he's excellent resource. They've already done some trial and error over the last couple of years and are improving every year, right?
Hopefully.
That's the idea anyway. Oh, one more quick question, Bill, before we send you off. How often do you have work days and how long are they?
They generally are an hour to, you know, one of the big work days might be an hour and a half. We try to schedule them in the morning on weekends for temperature wise, but when it gets cooler, we do them in the evening. And it depends on the growing season, but at least one a month, like from September to April, less frequent later.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bill. So now we're gonna head on over to our next speaker, but feel free to stick around if you can, because you're in for a treat. We are introducing Elise Picket of the Urban Harvest. The first time I met Elise was actually, she did a class at the PTC, and it was about almondine mushrooms. And I was unsuccessful. I'm sorry, Elise. I'm not one of your success stories, but it was an amazing seeing how much passion she had for just teaching a subject and just the love that and care that went into going into the garden. So without further ado, Elise, you are already a host. So go ahead and share your screen when you're ready, and I'm going to stop sharing mine.
All right, so Amber asked me to talk a little bit about some different things we might focus in on specific to fall, not necessarily year round. So I wanted to start off by introducing myself, since there are some new faces. I think when I was looking at Bill's bio, we have a lot in common. I was actually a marine biologist for a long time too. And gardening with my child, as a child with my father. I started the Urban Harvest in 2013 to try to help people learn the basics of gardening here in Florida. There's a big learning curve. Anybody who's from up north comes down here and says WTF. And even if you've lived here your whole life, like I have, you know, if you're not around it, you just don't know what you don't know. So I am here to be a resource to people looking to grow some of their own nutrient-dense food. And that's what I have been doing these past few years. And it's funny, I did this presentation obviously prior to this, but it's an overarching theme. Both Bill and Amber were talking about this. We're not beginners forever, but we never stop learning. Gardening is something that is going to be a constant evolution. It's never going to be perfect. No matter how long you've been doing it, you're going to have a crop that always succeeds where you fail, and you're going to lose some stuff, but it's kind of part of the process. And when you're working with nature, we are part of that interconnected ecosystem. And it's important to remember that you're not going to have that perfect plan turn out perfectly every time. But if you're growing food and you're outside and you're enjoying your time, then it's totally worth it. So I wanted to go over a few quick things with how to plan. And then we're going to go into some of the fall specifics, and then also into different varieties that really thrive here in our fall, winter, early spring months. So whenever I am starting a garden plan, I find it really important to not sit there and immediately start sketching out the beds and filling in all of these different plants. But I start with a simple list. And I think it's really important to remember that it should be a list of things that you actually eat. So if you're not sure where to start, go open your refrigerator. So if especially if you're working in an urban environment and you don't have a ton of beds or a ton of grow space, even if you're on an apartment balcony, you can grow food, but especially in an urban setting, we're going to have limitations to how much we can grow, plus time. We all have busy lives, and it can take us away from the garden. So yes, ideally, we might want to grow everything under the sun, because why not? But when we allow reality to take a little into consideration, we kind of have to hone in on what we really use on a very, very regular basis, because that is going to be what's most rewarding financially and not emotionally. I guess that's not exactly the right word, but that's going to feel the best to you because that's what you use on a regular basis. So even though everybody, like the hallmark, vegetable is like a tomato plant, like, of course you're supposed to have a tomato. Well, if you don't eat tomatoes all that often, or if you just like sauce and you don't use fresh slicing tomatoes, then skip the tomatoes and grow the spinach or whatever else you use on a very regular basis. Once you have that list of food that you actually eat all the time, it's time to do a little bit of research to figure out, one, is it the appropriate growing season? Especially if you're from up north, you might think a lot of the crops that you would typically grow in, say, summer, you should grow in summer. It's actually flip-flopped in general and in most cases to our winter. So make sure it's actually in season to plants. And figure out, things like how much room this plant takes up. Bill mentioned broccoli. They have a ton of space, which is awesome. But he also said that they focus in on things that turn over don't turn over very quickly, so you can harvest for a long period of time. So just comparing, for example, the broccoli and kale he mentioned. So if you have a broccoli plants, it takes up quite a bit of space, 1.5 feet square at least, if you're planting densely. And you're going to get, in most cases, a single head of broccoli. There are certain varieties, like he was mentioning, that do a few heads where you can harvest a little bit over a longer period of time. But in most cases, you're going to get a single head of broccoli from that 1.5 feet. If you compare it to your kale plant or lettuce, you're going to have a continual harvest out of that 1.5 feet for the entire season. So let's take, lacinato kale. It's a really well adapted kale plant to growing here in Florida. It's also called dinosaur kale, Nero de Toscano. There's like a bunch of different names for it, but that plant actually if well cared for over the summer months, can literally be a short-lived perennial. It can grow even in our hottest months. So we're talking about planting a kale plant at the beginning of the season in fall now, and you'll be able to harvest over it for, 4 or 5 months if you want to pull it out in spring, potentially longer if you choose. And that's probably going to be a handful of kale every single week for that entire duration. So when you're making your garden plan, even if broccoli is one of those staples that's in your fridge, you're going to also have to balance out the space you have and figure out what you actually have room to grow for and what's going to give you the most bang for your buck. Leafy greens are a really good one. They produce a ton in a very small space in general, but also root vegetables are a good option potentially. They don't tend to take up quite as much room, even though they are single use, I suppose you could say. But there are different options, and you're going to have to weigh out how much time you have, how much space you have, and your setup. And then you finally get to the design portion, where you're trying to figure out what to put into your beds, where you want to put them, how to maximize your space as best as possible. And even though that's the exciting part that everybody immediately wants to jump to, I think that taking the time to do those first 2 steps prior will give you a plan that not only functions better, but is more realistic for you. So just to recap, grow what you actually eat, not what you think you should grow. If your family does not dig cherry tomatoes because the way they pop in your mouth, then don't plant them. But if you have a little munchkin farmer running around and they like to pull tomatoes off the plant, by all means, go for it, even if it takes up half your garden bed. It's all about weighing out what you and your family truly enjoy. I wanted to go a little bit more into the plant spacing. I kind of had it as like, they weren't bulleted, but a bullet underneath the research section, and the planning really. But plant spacing is a really important consideration when you're first starting out. And there's a few different ways to look at it, but it can really maximize your yields tremendously by thinking outside of the box just a little bit with plant spacing. So being in an urban setting, we don't have a ton of room usually. So if you were to say, buy a tomato plant from Home Depot, or if you look at the back of your seed packet, it's going to tell you to plant, in rows with 6 inches or 12 inches between each plant and 2 feet between each row and blah, 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 depending on the crop. If you actually plant like that, you will have plants that do very well for you. That would be what I have as traditional on this slide. Your plants will grow nice and large. You will minimize your pest and fungal issues, usually, not always, but it wastes a ton of growing space. It's really not maximizing your garden to its fullest potential. If you're just starting out, go for it. Just know that that's a starting point and that you can definitely increase your yields and the number of plants you fit as either you gain more confidence in your ability or you gain a little bit more knowledge on how to put the pieces of the garden puzzle together. And as another side note, from a sustainability perspective, the traditional spacing is really high on watering needs. So if you are paying for city water to water your garden, or if you just want to be more environmentally conscientious, the winter is our dry season. Higher water needs is not a great scenario to be in. So that is definitely something you have to consider with traditional spacing. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you can have dense planting. I don't know if that's the appropriate term, but it's when you kind of go a little bit wild with the seeds and you just kind of toss them out and you're like, oh, they'll thin themselves out. When you get plants super dense, you're going to have a lot more competition between those plants. They're going to be fighting for water, nutrients, light, and just space in general. So when you plant super dense, in certain situations, it can be a useful and helpful tool. But most cases, it's not going to lead to the most productive scenario. You're definitely also much more likely to get fungal issues in that setting, because all of your plants, there's not going to be good air circulation, and they're all kind of brushing shoulders. So as soon as one plant gets powdery mildew or whatever the case is, it's going to share it with all its friends. So when you have a dense planting, you're going to have to be much more vigilant about that. But it can be useful. So especially like my husband loves salads, and we grow a lot of leafy greens. We haven't purchased leafy greens in over 2 years, and we eat a lot of salad smoothies. We do cooked greens. We do lots and lots and lots of leafy greens. Anyhow, my husband loves his salads, but he is also a very slow harvester, picker, whatever you can call it. If I send him out into the garden because I'm busy cooking, it's quite likely it's going to take him at least 30 minutes to pick a salad. So when you plant densely, which I've started doing a little bit better for him, we plant densely, you can literally go through, especially with like loose leaf lettuces, and you can take a knife and you grab a handful of these lettuces and you literally just cut an inch or so above the soil line. And it makes harvesting much, much easier and quicker. And you kind of do a cut and come again concept. So if you have your whole, 4 square feet, let's say you really like salads, 4 square feet of lettuces, you can go through and harvest small sections quickly and easily, like I just mentioned. And then you allow that patch to grow up. And then when you harvest your salad the next time, you just kind of move over, almost like a chicken tractor concept, where you're just kind of mowing along the lettuce. And as you go back, it'll have given it time to regrow. So in certain situations, a dense planting can be helpful, but for the majority of your crops, that's also not going to be a very favorable scenario. So then we get to that strategetic sweet spot in the middle. It's kind of like Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold. And when we take the time to strategize our planting, we can really maximize our yields, get the most out of the plants, but also the most out of our spacing. So what you're going to be doing with strategetic planting is kind of an example of it is in this diagram to the left. So instead of planting in those nice orderly rows that we will envision when we read the back of the seed packet, we can think just a little bit outside of that box, and we can offset our rows. And by doing so, we're going to be able to maximize our space and fit in twice the amount of crops. You're still going to be giving them the elbow room that they need to grow in, but because of the open spaces in between, you can squeeze in. So that's just one example of how you can fit more and still follow the spacing recommendations on the seed packages or the plant labels. But the other thing to consider, and this is definitely something that you learn as you go, and I guess maybe I should say now, like ahead of time, gardening can go as deep as you want. You can do as much planning as you want and as much research as you want. But if at any point you're like, okay, this is a lot of information, I'm a little overwhelmed here, then stop. Just plant some stuff in the ground. It will grow for you. You will get food and you can move on. But if you really want to start fine tuning things, you can take it another step further. And after you think about row spacing, you can think about how to fit in different crops in different ways to really, truly maximize what you're growing. So thinking about things like root zones where the plants are pulling their nutrients from, so there's less competition. You can think about plant height, harvesting timeframes. So a few examples of that would be radishes. They grow in very quickly, 3 weeks usually, 4 weeks depending on the variety, as long as you're not looking at like a daikon. Carrots take 80 to 90 days, almost 3 months. So what I like to do a lot of times is when I sow a row of carrots, I also sow a row of radish within an inch or two of that carrot row. And the radishes will very quickly grow in, fill the space. You'll harvest them. And then that's just as the carrots are starting to sprout and form any sort of root. So you're basically getting 2 crops in one space. An example of plant height could be something like a kale plant. So the lacinato kale that I mentioned, they also call them like kale palm trees. They really do look like palm trees after you start harvesting them. You get this one stalk in the middle and all of the leaves are up top. So it's a very tall crop with nothing below it. Rather than leaving the 2 feet or 1.5 feet of space in between those plants, which is what it could potentially maximize out to, and have all that dead space underneath that's, you know, increasing your watering needs and everything and your weeding needs, you could plant something that's low growing around it. So if you're looking at leafy greens, you could plant lettuces around it, or you could plant some bok choy or something like that, which has a lower growth pattern, so that you're able to fit the plants in the same amount of space, but they're not competing for the light like they would be otherwise. They're not brushing shoulders. So those are just a few different things to think about to really maximize your gardening, not necessarily specific to fall. And then one more caveat, which is just general garden planning, is to think about succession planting. I'm not going to go too in depth here because we are on a time frame and I want to focus in on fall, but succession planting gives most gardeners a manageable harvest consistently over the season, rather than a ton of produce all at once, at which point you're stuck either preserving a ton of it, sharing a lot of it with your neighbors, which is not a bad thing. But if you're looking to have something that you can rely on in your garden over the length of the season, succession planting might be a better fit. So season specific notes to gardening in fall here in Florida. Sunlight is really important, especially if you do not have your garden beds established and you're a new gardener. You may have looked out the garden window during the summer and said, okay, that looks like a great spot to put my beds. That's where they're going to go. It's really important to think about where the sun is going to be traveling as the days get shorter. It's sinking further south, and it's kind of hard to visualize or show in picture form. But if you have your garden beds when it's summertime, the sun is overhead, they may get 4, 6, 8 hours of sun. But if the sun sinks lower, further south behind us in our winter months, which is our prime growing season, it could very well cast shadows that you aren't seeing in the summer or early fall, which could really affect the growth of your plants in the winter months. So you need to have at least 4 hours, that's the bare minimum, of sunlight in your garden. If you get less than that, you're going to have either no growth or very, very slow minimal growth. So having 4 to 6 hours is ideal, up to 8 hours in the winter, 8 hours in summer, too much. But thinking about structures that sit to the south of your garden beds is really important consideration for fall gardening if you're just establishing your beds. So things like fences, the house, a tree, anything like that that sits directly south of your beds, it could very significantly impact the amount of produce you harvest from your garden. Also too, day length is really important. So plants get cues in different ways to know when it's time to create a root ball or when it's time to go to seed. Plants are very sophisticated. We don't think of it like that, but they are. And they are able to take in the amount of daylight that is in the area, and that tells it what to do, essentially. So there are some crops that are neutral, and it doesn't matter whether it's short days or long days. Obviously, we have short days in our winter months, but there are crops that are incredibly sensitive to it. Things like onions, potentially even beans. You need to look for varieties that are short day or neutral. If you plant a long day variety, they're not going to know that it's time to do its job to form a bulb in the case of an onion, or go to seed in the case of beans, if you don't have the appropriate variety. So looking on the back of the package, onions just are a good example. It's pretty much just like tomatoes. Like every tomato seed pack or label is going to tell you determinate or indeterminate. Onions are the same way. They're going to say short day or long day onions. So make sure you're looking for short day when you're planting in fall for those sensitive crops, so that you know they are going to do their job for you. You also need to think about things that are cold tolerant. So if you have planting guides, I know SUAC has a guide you can follow. I have a guide you can follow. IFAS has a guide that they put out as well, as to like general seasonal recommendations. But you do need to consider, even within like plant broccoli in, the fall, there are varieties within broccoli or within each of those vegetable categories. There's varieties that are going to be more or less tolerant to cold temperatures, or in our case, it's kind of important to have something that's okay with swings in temperature, because we obviously, being Floridians, if you've been here more than a year, like some years, we literally here in St. Pete and Tampa Bay, Pinellas County, we don't even get a freeze. And when we do get our cool fronts, it could very well be, upper 70s, lower 80s the very next day. So finding varieties that factor in those temperature swings can be a really important consideration for gardening in fall. So here's a list of different fall crops that tend to do really well here. I like to plant it in fall, and this is a difference between fall and spring. I'll still plant cherry tomatoes because, like I said, my daughter loves them. But if you're a tomato fan, now is the time to plant any of your large slicing tomatoes or determinate type tomatoes. They're going to do much, much better for you in fall than they are going to in spring. So fall is our dry time of year, fall, winter. And then in spring, we start getting our rains. That leads to cracking and splitting and fungal issues. And when you have these larger determinate type tomatoes, they take a long time to mature on the vine. And if they have too many fluctuations in rain, they're likely to split and crack. So planting them in the fall months as we're drying out is really beneficial. You can also look into the brassicas. All of them will need cool weather to form nice heads for you. Brussels sprouts in particular really need cold weather. We're really truly on the border, in my opinion, for them even doing well here. But they definitely need to be planted in fall, not later in winter going into spring. All of your root crops tend to do really well right now, as well as greens. I'm really into leafy greens. I did like an entire talk of growing leafy greens year round here in Florida. Definitely do it, but just think outside the box. Even when we're in our ideal planting season and we can plant a lot of the crops that we would traditionally find at the grocery store, it doesn't necessarily mean that they grow fantastic. So like my favorite example is spinach. Not everybody, but a lot of folks love spinach. And true Bloomsdale spinach does not thrive here. You can grow it. It does okay sometimes. It is not easy to grow here. But if you think outside the box, there are a lot of alternatives that do really, really, really well here and taste, look just like spinach. So tatsoi and chi jimensai are two really good options as a spinach substitute. looking into a lot of those Asian greens. A lot of people shy away from it, but they're truly really well suited here in most cases. And mustards too, like, so people will flip over and see like Tokyo Bacana or whatever, tatsoi, and they're like, oh, it's in the mustard family, it's spicy, it's like arugula. I don't like spicy, I don't want that. There are a lot of them are very mild in taste and very delicious. So just keep an open mind and give it a try. But I think pleasantly surprised. So am I okay on time, Amber? A few more minutes?
About 5 minutes or so.
Okay, cool. So this is pretty much the last slide, but seeds versus starts, it's an important consideration. We were chatting with a few folks at the beginning saying like, oh, I'm gonna like not start my garden until mid-October. There's always something to plant, but there are some different things to weigh out whether you choose seeds versus start. One of them is quantity. If you only need one plant and you're one gardener, it might be worth it if you have a good resource in the area, which this is a local organization. I teach across Florida, so I always have to say, if you have one, you do have one. You have lots of options of awesome growers here that can meet your needs. But if you only need one plant, it may not make sense for you to buy an entire package of seeds for your one seed that you need. I mean, you can do it. It's going to take more time and effort on your part, but it might be worth it if you only need one or two plants to just buy a start. The other thing to consider is variety. So if you're not buying from a quality nursery and you're just going to an online website, or if you're going to a big box store, you could very well end up looking at the things on the shelf and saying, oh, they sell them here, they must be well suited to growing here. And that is certainly not the case. So when you are looking at purchasing your plants or seeds, you need to find varieties that actually do well here. And there's lists. We have resources to send out that's local to our area for different growers in our area. But variety is a really, really important thing to consider. Just like I was saying with the spinaches and stuff like that. They're going to be better suited. And then also too, you want to consider where you're purchasing from. So finding local resources, joining the plant groups, that kind of thing. And finding a local grower that actually knows the plants that thrive in your area is going to go a really, really long way to the success in your garden. I think it's personally one of the most important things, that and seasonality, getting it in the ground at the right time. So we do have Bill's on the call. I don't know if Rachel is as well, or Carrie. And we also have Mallory at Wise Hands, but it's this, my business of teaching has just kind of constantly been one of feedback. So like, I just help people as much as I can, and I hear what they need, and we try to meet that need. So I work with Earth Song and Little Tree Homestead and Nursery and Wise Hands, and we do local plant pickups from my house every weekend. So you order online throughout the week, place your order by Thursday, you pick it up on the weekends. And then if it's a little bit of a drive for you, or you're just looking for seeds, I do have a huge selection of seeds that do well in our climate that you can just mail. I'll mail them to you. Both are options. We've got a ton of plants in. We've got 5 different varieties of bananas. We've got tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, melons, leafy greens. We have a ton of native plants. So it's definitely a good option if you're looking for that local nursery that really knows the varieties here. And if you're just dabbling or getting started in gardening, I do have a seed club that sends out 3 different varieties of seeds each month. And it comes with the cards to kind of give you some background knowledge, planting tips and such, so that you can get exposure to some of the different varieties that I mentioned. So if you don't know the local example, this could help expose you to some things that you might find really palatable and fun. So if you're interested in that, you can check out the website. I also do, I am not weekly anymore. I have a 4-month-old and a 3.5-year-old, and they keep me busy. I used to do weekly videos and tutorials on YouTube, different gardening topics. You know, a pest is eating my cucumber, or what tomato varieties plant, all different content, like 80 something videos at this point. I do not post as frequently, but I'm still trying to get my content out there. So that's definitely a resource to check out if you're interested. I also have a lot of the different resources that I found helpful. I have a local recommendations for soil if you're looking for installs. Peas in Love Garden is like, if you need somebody to do the work for you, she can set it up. So I have a lot of local resources there, and some of the books that I've found really helpful over the years with gardening. And then last but not least, I'm looking for some help. My friend and coworker is going to be moving on to a different opportunity. So I am looking for someone to help me out with the urban harvest for around 10 hours a week or so. So if you're interested in that, shoot me an email and I'd love to talk to you. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Awesome, Elise. Thank you so much. So I just want to recap a little bit. So plant what you like to eat. I did not start out with that. I just planned. I'm like, ooh, this all stuff grows. Let's just throw it in the ground. So I like the whole plant what you like to eat thing. And watch those winter hours. Those are some of like the biggest takeaways that I got. So I know we had a couple questions here in the chat. So I'll let Zoe take it away and ask some of those questions.
All right. So first questions we have are, what do you use for constructing your raised beds?
Depends on your budget, depends on your resources, the aesthetics, if you're working in an HOA or something like that. Currently at this house, I have metal beds. It's my first time working with them. I've been growing in them now for 2 years and I'm happy with them, especially with the cost of lumber. I always used to do lumber beds, but oh my gosh, astronomical. It wasn't cheap then. Certainly not cheap now. Then I kind of went rogue for a while in between. When I first started out, I always did the wood because that's what a raised bed is supposed to be, right? And then I took like commercial urban ag classes, and just like I was really getting into furthering my education a lot in this sector. And I moved to just windrows of soil, my compost that I would build, and I would just literally do unformed rows with no siding. I was really hesitant. My mentor was like, it's the way to go. It's the cheapest, most efficient. You know, anybody can do it. And I was like, no, we live in Florida. You know, the rains are going to wash it out. And it worked beautifully. As long as you keep it planted, it works really well. It's free. All you need is your soil, which you can make your own soil if you want, or you can buy it in bulk. But so now I have the metal beds. I also, like, you can kind of see a little teeny bit in this picture. That one, I also am super into like upcycling stuff. So that is a construction PVC water pipe that's like 3 feet around, that my buddy had sitting in his yard he worked for like a construction company, and he was their accountant, and he took them because he was going to make a planter. And if you knew them, it was just never going to happen. So I finally commandeered them after like 4 or 5 years, and they're my planters now. But yeah, just using whatever's available to you. If you're looking into organic gardening, just be mindful of pallets. Certain pallets are treated. Pressure treated wood is a no-go. If you're looking at wood, use like cedar or cypress. But in most cases, even those items, if that's what you want to go with, if they're lined appropriately, can still give you quality produce. So just using what you have available.
All right, thanks so much. We have one more from Jay. Do you use a modified approach of the square foot system?
I don't. I guess everybody does in a way. It's just kind of it's a really good starting point. The square foot gardening for the most part is basically maximizing the traditional spacing. But it's going by those guidelines. And I think as you grow when you're gardening. I think square foot gardening is a great place to start, but I think once you get the hang of things, you're going to realize like, oh, I could actually probably do a little bit more with this space. So if you're just starting out, great way to start. But I think that it's a building block and a stepping stone, which you can develop from there.
Cool. All right. Tatiana is asking, can you sow eggplant varieties right now?
It's a little late. If you're in, I mean, so normally I teach these like for statewide. If you're in South Florida, yeah. But if you're here in St. Pete, I think it's a little late. Eggplant is technically perennial, but you're going to have a teeny little sprout over the entire winter months because it's going to slow its growth in winter. So at this point, I would probably recommend using starts on seed until spring.
All right. And I think we covered the resources question, right, Amber?
We have St. Pete resources, but we did want to ask maybe some South Florida resources down Miami South. You know anyone?
I know of people on the East Coast, like closer to Vero Beach, like across the state, but not really all the way down in South Miami-Dade area. No.
All right.
All right. And then we have one last question. Do you find that you need to move your raised beds occasionally due to tree rot intrusions?
No. We live in Florida. A ton of homes around here have oak trees and stuff, and they certainly can be an issue, but typically I'm not going to be planting them close enough to a large tree like that that's going to have like an intrusive system, because they're probably going to be shading out the garden. But if that's the space you're working in and you've already done it where, you know, like you go through and you break up all the roots and you put it in fresh soil, and then like, you know, 6 months later, it's already like that matted mess. I would probably recommend just doing some containers if that's your only space to work with.
Unknown caller.
There, a lot of people like, I don't know why, but they like kind of frown on container gardening, and there's nothing wrong with it. It still grows you food. In many ways, it can actually be easier. You're not dealing with like, you know, potentially you're not dealing with like nematodes or as many pest issues. And, you know, so if that's the space you have to work with and that's your only option, then containers could be a good choice for you. Because moving raised beds on a regular basis, that's a lot of work.
And last question coming in here is, any tips for growing cucumbers?
So cucumbers and cucurbits, which are that family, melons, cucumbers, and squash, are, in my personal opinion, probably the hardest crops to grow here. They're really finicky and not well suited to our climate, and they have a ton of pests. So cucumbers in particular, watching for the squash vine borer, knowing as soon as you plant your seedling to be either mindfully watching or potentially even doing, like, if you're only doing a couple of plants and you're a home gardener, you can wrap the base of the plants with aluminum foil to keep them from laying their eggs there. That's a really big issue because everybody's got like that huge growth and it's looking amazing, and then the larvae hatch and then gone. So watching out for them. Making sure it's trellised and it has really good air circulation. They're really susceptible to fungal issues. So having good airflow can really help with that. In a nice sunny location when we're in fall and not spring can help keep them dry. Mulching around them so that they're not getting splash up from the soil for fungal issues. If you're really, really determined, I personally use an integrative pest management approach where I'm not really like doing much true like preventative care. But if you are bound and determined to get your cucumbers and you know you failed in the past from the little like worms and stuff like that, you could potentially use BT spray. It's a bacteria, Basilicus thuringiensis. and you spray it on as like the preventative thing, and they ingest it. It messes with their endocrine system and they'll die. But it depends on your overall approach to gardening as to whether you would want to use it or not. Variety, that does make a big difference. I find the Market More is really good. Sue Long, Ashley, Lemon, the Arkansas Little Leaf is a really good one. So definitely varieties can make a difference as well.
Do we have time for one more question, Amber?
Yeah, we got more questions. Go right ahead.
Okay. All right. We have another one that says, are beneficial nematodes recommended?
So the Basilicus thuringiensis isn't a nematode. It's a bacteria. So nematodes, everybody thinks nematodes are bad. There are good ones. I think it's actually something like 90-something% of all nematodes are actually either beneficial or benign. So they get a really bad rap. But would I purchase them to put them in the environment? Probably not. But I also focus a lot of my efforts on plant health. A healthy plant is going to be able to fight off any pest or disease issues a lot better. Feeding them well, planting seasonally, so not trying to fight the season, planting varieties that actually thrive here. I think doing those kinds of things are going to be a lot more effective than bringing in some of those other, in my opinion.
All right. It looks like that's it for now. So.
Excellent, Zoe. Thank you so much. All right, Elise, thank you so much for joining us today and talking. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen here again. It's hard for me to talk and do this at the same time. Okay. Went through our questions, and I just wanted to mention a quick thought too on the companion planting. You had mentioned kind of carrots and radishes grow well together. Is there any other of your favorites companion planting things that you might plant together or in the same time or a same bunch that you think would be super successful?
I highly recommend planting your dill with your cabbage. It draws in the parasitic wasps, beneficial insects. Has a slightly repugnant smell to some of the pests, and I find it does really well companion planted with cabbage.
Dill and cabbage. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. All right. If you like what you saw here today, please, we always appreciate feedback. So check us out at wedigstpete@gmail.com or mention us on Facebook and once again, Instagram as well. We do have individual memberships. Our big membership drive is going to be later into the year because we're kind of coming to an end. But if you love our mission, you want to support it, we always hope that more people will become members, and we want more people growing healthy food out there in the city and sharing the word. And just in the few short years, I've only been a part of this urban ag community for about 4 years, and the amount of growth that I've seen in that short period of time has been insane. A lot of businesses popping up that weren't always there. So once again, everybody, round of applause for Elise. You can't hear us all, but you can hear me. So just imagine that like tenfold.